Okay. Did you hear recording in progress? Oh yeah, I see it.
I
Okay.
did. Yeah, I mean, type theory is like both a huge and ill-defined area. And so that's why it's like intimidating to try and even attack something with the title type theory, is how I feel about it. Um,
Yeah, yeah, but okay, but like, what else are you gonna do, right?
I know. You
If
just
you
gotta
if
like, don't be scared, jump off the boat, jump off the cliff.
yeah,
Surely
but
you'll
that's
land
that's not
somewhere
just
nice. And
yeah. That's not necessarily what I mean. I mean, you know, how could you possibly honestly try and explain something to someone by giving them some tiny little detail of some tiny little technical field? You need to talk about the big picture first. I mean, you have to, right? Otherwise, there's there's nothing to care about. There's nothing interesting. You just talk about some stupid little corner or some detail.
yeah, I don't know. I feel like there's something particular about type theory that I do feel like it is ill-defined what it is exactly. Even more so than I feel like you asked me what is chemistry, what is physics, what is computer science, some of these, even maybe even what is logic. And I think I might have a better answer. Or like I could start to like say some things, point some stuff out. Well, we could do the same thing here. We could say some things, point some stuff out. I mean, the first thing that a kind of type that
Sorry,
computer
sorry, sorry.
people,
Let me pause for a second and say,
yeah,
hi everyone. I'm Cody Root. This is the Church of Logic, and I'm here with Phil Zucker, who has things to say about type theory, and then
I
I have
really
things to
don't.
answer. Well, okay. You were in the middle of a sentence,
Okay,
so
I
why
was
don't you
about to.
finish that sentence, and then maybe I'll take it from there, and we'll see if the ping pongs.
Yeah, I mean, I have nothing to say about type theory except like maybe a 30 to 40 to hour, 2 hour tirade, just meandering, different examples and sort
I
of
don't
different
what
facets and
else
stuff.
what else is a podcast, right? This is like there's some dudes that are doing this about I don't know, about like paleo diets or whatever.
Yeah.
And surely, what we're doing is more philosophically legitimate than that. And even if we're ranting at the same level of sophistication, at least we're ranting about a subject that deserves it more.
Deserve it. All right. Well, we could go into that. Like, what is
Yeah.
what is like that subject that deserves our respect,
Yeah,
and
yeah. Okay, okay.
what's the point of it all? And what? Anyway, types.
All right. Anyway, types. So okay. So types is ill-defined. You feel like there's no real thing that represents types, and certainly what type theorists do versus what logicians do versus whatever it is, you know, I don't know, software engineers do, or even
Yeah.
programming language designers do. All those feel different.
So, I mean, the first version of type I was aware of is, I mean, this is my background. I was a program from a fairly young age. And, I had some brush in with C or C++ as a teenager somewhere in Java. And so I do have the awareness that like an integer is a data type, that a bool is a data type, that a float is a data type representing like, numbers with decimals in them kind of, and that like it doesn't always make sense to do certain things combining them in different ways. It doesn't necessarily make sense to add a string to a number or to an integer. And so there's two, well, maybe more than two, but there's some ways you could dignify why you want to bring this into discussion. One, you want to like keep yourself safe from just making typos, and like if you ever do something that just like doesn't make any sense for like obvious reasons, you can have it toss it back at you. It's easier than like just having the thing go through and then having some crazy crash. The other perspective is that just the compiler writer, the people who are making, like, to actually turn what you wrote into machine code, you sort of need like this extra bits of information to make it go fast or to make it obvious, like, what are you even talking about? An integer is just this thing that fits in a register of a particular size, and like you can do these particular things. And so, like, I think from a very pragmatic perspective of the origins in the 50s or something of like programming languages, for computers, electronic computers. Like think that's why they brought that in. Although these people were very connected to logicians, some were logicians themselves. So it's hard. I've never heard a straight up story of like there's an older tradition of types to
Yeah.
Russell, where it's sort of at a high level connected to this idea of like sanity checking, even what you're talking about. And Russell's versions of types is that they had these issues with paradoxes in set theory, in Frege's theory, and so this paradox where you have the set of all sets that don't contain themselves, this Russell's paradox, and it's like,
Hmm.
okay, we don't want this to be a thing you can discuss, so we like sort of need to constrain the sort of the things you can discuss. And types was he had some motivation for thinking. I don't know exactly what Russell's versions of types look like. Maybe you can help me here. The Principia Mathematica is like a bizarro world
Yeah.
compared to like
Yes.
100 years evolved from it, is my understanding anyway. I
Yeah,
also
yeah, yeah.
haven't really studied
It
it.
is. I unfortunately I'm very lazy, and so unfortunately, I know some bits and pieces, but I don't know quite enough to be able to really be like confident in my answer. But I do remember that yes, there there are definitely, things in the Principia, description of logic that you are allowed to do comprehension over. Um, and those things you kind of want those to be in their own layer or category. And yeah, Russell and Whitehead called these types, which are types of things you're allowed to do comprehension over, and those things live in, in the type, one level up, and every um let's see if I remember this correctly. It seems to me that every statement within a comprehension has to be well typed, which is to say that, an X can be a member of Y only if, the type of Y is one plus the type of X. Now, unfortunately, they found that this was unworkable and they needed to add a little axiom to their system. And that axiom basically says, oh, you can collapse all the types. So that they weren't super thrilled about that axiom, but also they couldn't despite that axiom they didn't know how to derive any paradoxes. So they were like, well, at least good enough. And and then in the future versions they're like, oh, we can just remove this axiom. And apparently, but I don't really know the details of this, you end up with something that's very similar to something called Church's simple type theory, where now, you quantify over, species of like a given sort, and then, relations are sort of restricted to that sort. So
Right.
that's my understanding of the historical aspects of, the origins of what people call type theory. What's kind of cool, and the only thing I actually do know for having done the legwork is this theory is pretty cleanly written out in Gödel's, seminal incompleteness paper. He knew, I mean, of course he knew that he was going to have to lay out a very clean logic to be able to talk about these things. And the one he chose is basically a version of simple type theory. He calls it the Principia Mathematica, but it is definitely not that. And it's actually pretty like similar to what you do today if you wanted to present, higher order logic.
Mhm. And so
Uh,
simple type theory, that's what we might call more or less the simply typed lambda calculus.
well,
Uh,
yeah, I always this is always a subtle point because um the simple types dictate the things which we quantify over, right? The things we're allowed to quantify over are, have a simple type, right? You're allowed to quantify over the functions, you're allowed to quantify over the predicates, and those things have simple types. But people often confuse that with the simply typed lambda calculus as a programming language without quantifiers. And I'm
right.
I'm sure we've had this actual discussion before at some point where you were confused about this lambda calculus as, programming language where you can sort of see the types as propositions via this Curry-Howard, and the theory of simple types as a logic where the things you quantify over have simple types.
Yeah, I still don't see that they should be that different. I mean, just the like terms in this logic that you're allowed to have for all and exist quantifiers. I'm assuming those are quantifiers we're talking about.
You
The
actually need
terms
for
are
all,
going to
but yeah.
be, maybe the same things that are in the simply typed lambda calculus, but maybe with an equality. Although I guess equality might itself be a function that you can talk about. So,
Yeah, usually you have equality in there, you have for alls and you have implies, and then you can sort of derive everything else if you're so inclined. And then you need a
mhm,
couple axioms to get the ball rolling. That's basically exactly what's in HOL.
right. Um,
So,
okay.
okay. So let's talk about type theory. The programming language, some things can't operate with other things. You can't add a float and an int, or you can't, or rather, you can't add a string and a bool. Um, Great. That's a great perspective. I'm not fond of that perspective because it feels very much types are there to keep you from doing things. I came at, I think for me, I came at it completely from math. And so, when you're just doing math, I really like logic. But yeah, in mathematics you come and you start learning about all these different data structures, basically, these algebras, right? You learn about groups, you learn about rings, you learn about topological spaces, you learn about, I don't know, um, differentials. You learn about things that have a certain type of algebra. And in my mind, type theory is a very generic, abstract setting in which to do algebra, basically. You're saying, okay, well, what do we do when we do algebra? Well, we have certain operations, and just to describe those operations, we need to talk about, the things that they operate on, the things that they, that you can conceive of with them, and the information that they need to be able to be carried out, right? When you multiply two elements of a ring, right? You need to talk about the elements of a ring. You need to talk about the result of that multiplication. And then you want to talk about, things that multiplication satisfies. And as far as I can tell, in this Martin Luff philosophy of type theory, you really just embrace this principle. You just want to say, hey, types are a way to describe abstract operations uh, and their constraints in a way that makes sense. And to me, I think that's a very compelling way to say, okay, this is what we care about. We care about describing operations in ways that they make sense. And if you can, the objective of type theory is to build a framework in which you can do this. Now, Martin Luff is, the early 70s. In some ways, he's 40 years too late because, hey, Ernst, or what? Sorry, 60 years too late. Um, Ernst Zermelo has figured out set theory, and in set theory, you can encode all these things, right? You can sort of build sets that encode what a ring should be, a carrier set. And then, whoa, multiplication is just a function, and function is just a set of pairs. And great, you can encode all this stuff in this very complicated way. But I think it's pretty natural to say, hey, give me a language that's much more, that doesn't have this layer of encoding where you can just talk about the operations themselves and what they're supposed to be between, right? I think category theory has some of this aspiration, but I don't really want to talk about category too much at this
yeah.
point. Um,
Uh,
but yeah, I don't know. I find that exciting.
so with Martin Low, you're jumping to forward to the 60s, and we're talking about dependent type theory now, right? Is that
Yes, yes.
accurate?
Yeah.
And you say that the type theory in the Martin-Löf style is like a further generalization of algebra, and it's like a natural thing to do. But I guess I think I've heard you also say that almost logic is that like logic itself, some or formal logic, is almost a generalization of algebra. That the quantifiers are very much like summation symbols. In fact, they derived historically, I think, from or heavily inspired by summation symbols and things like that. The big sigma, and the Boole's in the 1830s or something, George Boole, the idea that like a one should represent true and zero could represent false, and you can
Yeah,
multiply these.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
like algebra is like so really in the mix from the very beginning.
Yes, yes, that's true.
Um, so like yeah, all of it is kind of like generalized algebra, and
That is true. I
I,
think Martin Love had very ambitious aspirations, right? He really wanted to say anything that you can describe in a precise language. Um, you should be able to encode it in this language. And he
mhm,
had this very, again, unfortunately, maybe I'm underprepared for this one. Um, he really had this philosophical bent where he wanted to say, hey, if you want to be able to talk about something that's true, well, how, how do you justify this thing? Or if you want to talk about a construction, you have to tell me what pieces are needed for this construction. And so he had, obviously he was coming from a logical tradition where you had deductions, right? And a deduction has something above the line, you can conclude something below the line. But he really wanted to embrace this and say, okay, philosophically, what do you have? You have constructions that you want to make. How do you make a construction? Well, A, you need to tell me what you're constructing. B, you need to tell me what you need to construct those things. And those are kind of the only things that you need to tell me, right? You need to tell me what and you need to tell me how. And then here is a language in which to express those things. And it's type theory, right? It is the what you're constructing is the type, and the how you're constructing is the introduction rules for that type.
mhm.
Um, and
Yeah,
yeah, continue.
I guess I've I first heard about dependent types and I was fascinated. I was learning about Haskell and things, and I heard about, we haven't touched on the Curry-Howard correspondence. Maybe we've lightly touched on it. And I was like really all in on like, oh man, this is the thing I want to learn. I want to learn more about cock. I want to learn more about lean and things. Oh, lean was barely a thing at that point, but and now I think I've grown almost like lately antagonistic of dependent type theory. Like my default is to try and I feel like that's almost the status quo, is that dependent type theory is like the mainstream thing to talk about, at least in the programming languages circle. And I don't know, I'm a little unconvinced on like its naturalness or goodness. And I've actually been learning more about the set theory version of things, or like the older tradition or the first order logic tradition, and finding it very refreshing and sort of more making more sense to me, and like the encodings kind of being like helpful to the understanding even like you can make a program that has like a bunch of junk in it. Like you end up translating between these different layers, and there's no reason to like translate between all those layers. And you write it the second time, or you get better at programming, and you're like, actually, I never really need to make a whole syntax tree here. That was like that was 500 lines of boilerplate. I never should have written any of that. And so you can like strip this stuff away. And then at a certain point, sometimes you can just go too far and like simplifying things or getting rid of the structure or getting rid of the encoding or the ability to see. I don't know. That's a little bit how I feel about dependent type theory right now, that it like strips away too much and it sort of becomes mystical. Dependent type theory, I think, or at least maybe I didn't appreciate like the spectrum of different thoughts you could have when I was first hearing about it, which is, what happens when you're a beginner and anything. You don't realize that there's many different ways of looking at something, and that there's not one true way, and there's not
Yeah,
mystical
yeah, yeah.
significance to this one way.
I
Um,
I mean this,
I don't know.
this episode is about type theory, right?
Yeah.
I think maybe not a neutral attitude, but an open attitude would be, hey, type theory is a thing. Why is it a thing? A, and B, what are cool things about it, right? what's up with type theory?
It
And
is, it
then,
is fascinating.
and then you could
Yeah,
have a separate debate, which is, oh, should we all be using type theory in our proof assistants, or is type theory more convenient to use in our proof assistants, or you know, is it important to know type theory if you're going to do you design a programming language? And
right.
I have thoughts on this, but I'm not sure that's what this is. This is more like, hey, what's up with that? And
Yeah,
in some ways, yeah, it's a logic because logics are ways to, introduce judgments. And in some ways, it's an algebra because algebras, yeah, every algebra is basically a set of constructions, right? Ways to, introduce operations into, what would you call them? Into, categories of, uh, I'm at a loss for nouns. An algebra is generally a way to introduce a bunch of entities and operations between them. And type theory with its judgments and its introduction forms, yeah, it gives you a way to do that. Great. Um, Maybe it's useful to study type theory, in the abstract as, what's up with that. And yeah, of course. I've done this for a while, and many people have done this. And so
mhm.
now, there's this further emotional um component of, does this really matter? Is it worth, what I've spent the last 20 years of my life thinking about, is this actually like worthwhile or not? And
Yeah,
I guess we're getting lost in the weeds here, but you talk to number theorists and they will tell you, they will talk to you for hours about things that you don't understand. And what you really want to know is, why should I care about any of this? But it's a question that is very hard to ask, because if the answer is there's no reason, well, then you're just telling this person that, they spent decades of their life, with intense effort to understand something that they don't really need to care about. And I mean, okay, I do think that math is fun for its own sake.
yeah. I
But
I
you know,
think I think I've yeah, fun for its own sake. Just aesthetics is important, and aesthetics is a good endeavor. And if you find type theory beautiful, then pursue it. And if you find it enjoyable, pursue it. Um, or if you find something else enjoyable, pursue that. But I'll live a good life. I don't know. We've gone way off into
yeah.
the weeds, but yeah, dependent types.
Dependent types, I don't know. The in the Martin Luff version, so okay. So in the church simple type theory, right? There's sort of only three things, right? There's for all quantifier, where you can quantify over all things, of type nat or of type nat aeronat, right? These are the types. I feel like we haven't really gotten into the weeds enough to like just define what the types are. So you can quantify over, functions and functions that take in functions, etc. And then you have implication, and then you have equality. And that's almost it. You just have a few little axioms that govern these things, and then you can pretty much define everything else, right? Usually you need a type of natural numbers, and you need, zeros and plus ones. But man, after that, you're pretty much set. You can define everything in terms of those little few constructors, right? For
Yeah,
all, implies, equals. Those are very few constructions, and then you only need two or three axioms. That's kind of cool. And set theory is kind of cool that way too, right? You just
yeah,
need a few axioms, and they're very powerful. And they're a little ugly in some ways. They're kind of messy, but they do feel not too bad, right? They feel very much, hey, I can think of two things. Well, that's a set. Hey, I can think of, if I have a bag of bags, I can think of the one big bag of all the elements of that bag. Hey, that's a set. Great. And so you want, I don't know, it feels very aesthetically pleasing as a logician to try and figure out what, you know, species of things I need to think about, and what are natural things. How deep, how fundamental are these things to, the nature of thought or the nature of mathematics. How very elementary are those things? One thing that is kind of annoying about sets is now you talk about choice, that feels a little bit messier. It doesn't feel very, very natural. It requires some concepts that are derived and they're a little bit more intricate. And um, in simple type theory, things are a little bit better, but you have axioms. The logical axioms are a little bit messy. You need double negation, elimination. You need a few things. And in Martin-Love type theory, what do you have? You have dependent function spaces, which is a function space whose range can change depending on the input, parameter. And then you have inductive families, which are families defined by a bunch of constructors, and you give very light restrictions on what kind of constructors those are. And then from that, you can derive an eliminator, which is, what does it mean to be an element of this inductive family? And, what does it mean for the set of functions that come out of that family? And once you give that generic schema, you can define everything else with those two things, dependent function types, inductive families. You can define equality. That's crazy. You can define ands, you can define ors, you know, implication, and for alls, right? You got everything there with those two ideas. And those two ideas feel very, very intuitive, right? I mean, they feel very conceptually clean. So I think that's exciting for like this aesthetic sense that we were talking about. Aesthetically, it feels like we've done something pretty cool here, which has come up with some very, very generic philosophy, theological concepts. And by pushing them through as hard as we can come up with the bread and butter of what it means to be a logic or what it means to be a foundation of mathematics. I think that's kind of cool. The fact that it's used in practice and lean, sure. Um,
What does it take to define the reals? Doesn't sound like one of those things will let you define the reals.
well, yeah.
I mean, it's hard in all these systems. Well, you just sort of have to bolt it in, is sort of my experience of like what you do in higher order logic. You don't have to bolt it in set theory, but I feel like that's what a lot of people end
What?
up doing, is just
No,
sort
in
of
higher order
bolting it in.
logic. What? No, 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 no. You can define the reals. You really kind of need the excluded middle, and the excluded middle always comes kind of out of nowhere here. Like these logics really are naturally constructive. But once you have the excluded middle, I mean, Martin-Love type theory tends to be predictive, and in predictive logics, yeah, some things are a little bit awkward.
I guess,
But
all right, maybe more specifically, here's what I'm channeling actually is I first learned Coq through Software Foundations, and I was like learning about, okay, like define these inductive data types. Oh, the natural numbers are inductive data type. It's got a zero and a successor. That's pretty neat. And you can go through all this rigmarole and define through these generic mechanisms, addition, and there's an algorithm for addition, there's an algorithm for multiplication. You can reason about it. Indeed, equality is a bizarre dependent data type. But then, and so like kind of the thing I've wanted to get to was learning about talk about cosines and sines and things. And I think eventually at some point I became aware that in at least you don't have to do it this way, but I believe in the Cox-Stern libraries it was like, oh, actually you just state there is a type called the reals. You
yeah, yeah.
state it has this property. You state it has 10 properties or something or operators on it. And there is a ability to take least upper bounds or something is like some fundamental aspect of it that lets you convert sets of reals into like a particular reel. And that's sort of what you get. But then that's like, I don't know, if you're saying that like you can construct all these things, I'm not sure what I'm getting at. It's just I think
Yeah, you're
the
you're
inductive
saying
family
that
thing is
they're
overemphasized as
yeah,
like a useful thing to do. And I kind of like
that's
bolting stuff in. I actually these days I enjoy like stating, you know what, I just want there to be a gosh darn sort called differentiable functions or something. And then I'd be on thin ice the whole way through about what you're allowed to do with them. Um,
No, no,
or the real.
I think that's I think if Andrej were here, you guys could have a lively argument that might, end up in him Googling your address so he could come kick your ass. But and
I'm tough.
I would
I'm big.
definitely pay-per-view that. But
I deserve it. Andres knows. I can't even quantify how much more he knows than me, but
yeah, well, okay. One of Andrea's points that I really enjoyed when we talked was kind of this point, right? Was if you work in a logic that's flexible enough, you can assume things like every function is differentiable, um, and that's consistent, right? But you can only do that in a sufficiently constructive logic. Now that doesn't have to be
yeah,
type theory, but up to today, that has kind of been, the world we live in, where if you want, off the shelf logic that is constructive, well, there it is, type theory. And it just so happens that yeah, I don't know, maybe because of how generic it is, but it does feel like these type theories have popped up where you can do all these synthetic, assume everything's differentiable or everything's C infinity or these have popped up as looking more like type theories than they have looking like set theories. So I have to say, with toposes, you're really straddling the line there, where one could argue that a topos is just kind of an awkward set theory or an awkward type theory. Um, yeah,
yeah. I mean, there
it would.
are. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, my last point is that it would really be nice if the reals were just another inductive family, and I agree that that does not seem to be the case. Um, Typically, a set is you build a set of functions or you build some kind of co-recursive type, and then you have to quotient that. And a quotient is not cleanly defined as a type of inductive family in the sense of Martin law. You usually need a little bit more juice there. And it's not far from being that. And in homotopy type theory, of course, people try to come up with what a reasonable quotient type would be, and they try to use that to do exactly what I said, which is come up with a reasonable data type that represents the reals that feels kind of natural, that feels like, you know, but I don't know. It would be beautiful if the reals were kind of, I don't know, if you could build an inductive family that where least upper bound was like the only constructor or something, and that was just the reals. But that's not the case. The reals are kind of an awkward thing. To be fair, they are kind of an awkward thing, right?
They
Like
are awkward. I'm not
figuring out what
actually.
the reals are, like having a clean, precise definition, um, took a few years, and yeah, trial and error there, I think. Um,
The reels, I've got a bone to pick with the reels because they're sort of
I
identified with like
like how you
physical.
have a bone to pick with type theory because it can't define the reals, and now you have a bone to pick with the
I
reals.
know it's I love just throwing stones and offering nothing. That's why I'm so fun at parties. Um, yeah, we're going real astray here. It's fine, whatever. Um,
I'm having a
the
blast.
the reals are like people try to identify them with physical reality with measurement, and it's just not really a very good fit of like as a mathematical model of physical measurement. Because you have like the reals are these truly like infinitely divisible things, and that's just like nuts from a physical perspective. And like all these like when we're talking about like oh the mathematical issues of the reals or whatever, we're talking about like if you finitize them in any way, if you like said no, really you don't need to ever go smaller than 10 to the negative 100,000,
Yep, and
then
you just have
like it's
gnats.
all go yeah just use nats like just list out all the numbers you could ever want to talk about and you're fine. But no, we want to be like in this have the idea of a least upper bound of a set where like what is the set you're taking a least upper bound of? I don't even know. And it, but you're allowed to say it exists and things like that. I don't know. So there's just like
Yeah.
they are like they're a very unique point is the story. They're a very unique point in the mathematical like space. The definition of the reals, it seems to be like kind of uniquely identified, which makes it feel right. But also, if there's any like weirdness associated with the reals, I'm just ranting now.
No,
It's not a physical
no,
issue.
no, no. I actually agree with you on most of these points. It does feel like the reels are this funky thing that that involve, limits of Cauchy sequences. What the heck? Like Cauchy sequences? Who knows off the top of their head what that is? Of course, all mathematicians know and are crying right now. But
Yeah,
man, you have to admit that writing down a definition is a little bit ugly. And um, it feels a little ad hoc. And hey, guess what? There's other constructions for the reals, and those constructions are like not at all alike, and it doesn't feel very synthetic, right? It doesn't feel like we've come at this, inevitably. It feels like we've come at this very evitably. And okay, but however, there are kind of at least characterizations of the reals as being pretty synthetic, where it's like kind of, hey, if you want if you want something that contains the rationals, which is a very reasonable thing to want, and um has the least upper bound property, for example, well, and there you are. You have the reals. Or if you want something where, hey, you can solve, with the intermediate value theorem holds, which is pretty much the same thing, guess what? The reals. And hey, if you want something that's, epsilon away from being a complete field that contains the rationals, hey, that's the reals again. And so yeah, it is kind of a, an attraction point. It's just watching
yeah,
something on differential equations. An attraction point of like kind of a reasonable thing to want. But at the same time, all of its definitions feel a little bit messy. It's not quite analytical. It's not quite algebraic. If
yeah.
if you try and build, some nice algebraic definition, you're gonna end up in, the p-adics or something. And okay, well that's garbage. And yeah. And then of course, if you want to do topology, then yeah, it's very messy, right? The algebraically, people hate working, pointfully. Um, so I don't know. I mean, yeah, maybe it just means that maybe I'm just ignorant, or maybe it just means that there's better synthetic theory of the reals out there somewhere. Probably it won't ever be like a clean inductive definition in some type theory. Maybe. Maybe there are type theories that are perfectly geared towards defining the reals completely synthetically.
Yeah.
Uh, I'm not
I
super optimistic about that.
I mean, some of the things I've been saying about the reals could also apply to the rationals or even the integers. I feel like, again, the software foundation story of like looking at the piano nats and being like, oh, isn't this kind of cute how like induction is so natural and yada yada. I don't know if it's like so natural for like what are the rationals? They're an equivalence class of, or one construction is there an equivalence class of pairs of
Correct.
an integer and a nat.
Yeah, correct.
And like I don't know if that's that clean of a thing that what
Non-zero, yeah.
yeah in type theory.
Um,
But maybe the rationals are evil, and we never should have had them.
well, okay, yeah. So yeah. I do think that yeah, there's something to that. Certainly it's simpler. For example, equality is decidable on the rationals. So right there, that gives you a pretty big advantage. Um, I do think the API of the rationals feels cleaner than that of the reals, and yeah, it's pretty clear, two numbers go in, one number comes out. Uh, and you sort of don't want to see what's hiding behind the curtain. And inductives is the opposite, right? Is everything's very explicit about construction and then very implicit about manipulation, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
Right? An abstract API for something is the opposite of an inductive family. An abstract API only tells you how you can use the thing, not how the thing is made. And an inductive family only tells you how the thing is made and not
Hmm.
how you really, you use it. I mean, of course, then the eliminator tells you how you use it, but the eliminator feels post hoc. I don't know. Um, I agree with all these things. I do think, yeah, at some point you do want natural ways to construct things via APIs or something. I do think that eventually you're going to construct objects that are complicated and messy and have, some, of their own internal logic that can't be captured by a single framework. At least not uniformly, right? Maybe you can adapt the framework, or maybe you can use the framework to reason about them, and that's what we do, when we use a proof assistant.
Hmm.
But the natural setting in which you want to do, you know, calculus or, you know, analysis might have different rules than what your type theory naturally provides.
Yep.
But okay, but at least type theory, I think, asks a question, which is what is your API, right? Set theory doesn't ask that question. It says, here's some axioms. You can build all these things, and great. And if you like, you can build rationals. Um, but yeah, but of course, now you're stuck in. Oh, here's another point I wanted to make. Um, in set theory, or at least in first order logic plus the usual ZF axioms, um, it's very clear that in theory you can do all these things. It is very, very not clear that in practice you can do all these things. In particular, the one big, big missing bit um, is definitions, right? You want to define things all the time, and that is absolutely crucial. If you want to actually use these systems, you must be able to make definitions and make definitions that depend on those definitions, etc., ad nauseum. And I think that's a little bit more natural in type theory. Now, I will say, in all fairness, that in Martin-Luff type theory and in the calculus constructions as originally presented, there wasn't an explicit definition operator, right? And so that again had to sort of be left implicit.
Yep.
Um, I think that is one crucial thing. And of course, like in the book I'm reading right now, which is about set theory, he spends quite a bit of time talking about, oh, you can make definitions, and then you can always prove that those definitions weren't really necessary. But I'm not going to do it here because it's all messy. And great, yeah, it is a little messy, and all the more reason for you to include it, from the start. In set theory, for example, you don't even say, here's how to make pairs. You say, oh, there exists a pair for each two sets. There exists a set which is the pairs of that set. But
Yep.
man, now if you want to talk about pairs or sets of pairs, no, you have to use that existential somehow. It's super awkward. Um, I think the API for set theory is like not at all what you get into ZFC axioms. You want at least the constructors for pairs and power sets and replacement and maybe choice. And you want all those to be in your hands. And then you want the ability to define new things, right? When you define the reals, like in set theory, you prove that there exists a set such that, and then this horrible, horrible sentence that honestly would be lines and lines and lines. Um, if you were to unfold everything. But no, you don't do that. You say there exists something in terms of all these things I've defined in chapters 2 through 5, and it has these properties, and now I'm going to give it a name, and it's R, and then I'm going to refer to that thing by name. And I think if you want to be serious about having a foundation of mathematics, you at least need to be a little bit serious about saying, hey, here's what I allow you to do to give things names.
Yep.
And of course, if you have choice, then you have this kind of non-deterministic naming schema, which is kind of cute.
Yeah, I agree. I think definitions are definitely a thing that's swept under the rug in my experience of like trying to play around with making a proof assistant or something. Like I see
What
the
is it
the
called
thing
already?
knuckle dragger. Um uh conservative extensions was a Wikipedia page that I found interesting, at least. The
Yes.
idea that you can introduce new symbols that really are defined to be these other things, but you're not able to prove anything about sentences that did not involve the new symbols that you couldn't
I'm
before.
obsessed with conservative extensions. And since
Yeah.
we're running long anyway, I feel comfortable. What do the people want, right? They want us to riff about these things.
Yeah.
And by the people, I mean me. I think the whole program, Hilbert's whole program was to build a set of conservative extensions of an unobjectionable logic, such that the set of conservative extensions was enough to do all of mathematics. And notoriously he failed, right? Because Gödel proved that there could be no, conservative extension of arithmetic that could prove, all of ZFC. However, in some ways, we've succeeded wildly, which is we know how to start with these really, really weak systems. One of them is called re recursive comprehension axiom, some subset of like piano arithmetic. And we know how to build in these conservative extensions, these ways of defining things, even quantifying over sets and functions, such that you can't prove any new things. Now this does have limitations, and there are things that are awkward to define, and like the reals is one of them. But we have built like a quite impressive array of extensions that give you really, it's like Batman, right? We've built tool belts that allow you to go from ordinary Bruce Wayne to something quite powerful that allows you to reason about quite a bit. And um, you know, some people have postulated that for real results that only talk about, say, the natural numbers, we have no clear examples that really need beyond piano arithmetic. Um, That is demonstrably false, actually. There are a few Ramsey theorems that are famously like not provable in piano arithmetic. But honestly, day to day, it's not clear that this, that we ever really actually use these things. And that's, we know this thanks to the power of conservative extensions, thanks to the power of like adding expressiveness, adding this huge like, juice of expressiveness without adding anything uh more to the logic
Mhm.
somehow, to the proof power. But yeah, yeah, Knuckle Dragger. Tell me about it. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's cool because it's built on Python, and I think the point you're trying to make is that you can just program in Python, and that is your conservative extension. Is
Well, the
that?
conservative extension is you're talking about like pairs and set theory, where if you like look at the axiom, it is like for any two sets, there exists a set that like has both of those sets in it, right? That is the axiom. You can write that down, and like the thing that helps me understand these things is actually implementing them in some form, because the point of formal logic is to be very precise, to be very mechanical, or at least one version of what formal logic. I don't know. There's
Mhm.
never one version of anything,
Yeah.
but um, and so like being on the computer actually forces you to. It gives you like little assignments that are like, did I understand what I read at all? Can I actually transform it trivially into another form and so on? And so that's like that axiom is not at all even a natural thing that I would want to have written in that form. What I would have written naturally is just there exists a function called pair, which takes in two sets, and then this function I'd write down some axioms about like what that
Yeah.
function
But of
does.
course, yeah,
And
what you would want is to extend the signature of set theory to be quite a bit more than it is.
yes,
Right.
but then you're like, okay, well, I don't know. But then if you can prove that something exists, there are what is it that lets you? That's some conservative extension theorem. If you can prove something exists, you're allowed to like make a new name for it, and you'll be fine. And that's sort of this like
Yeah,
a
yeah.
meta
I
theorem.
think
uh,
this might be exactly the Skolem theorem, which
yeah,
is to say that you can extend your theory with a bunch of new names, And if you can prove that something exists and is unique, you can now use that new name, and then the definition of that thing is the thing you proved exists.
Mhm.
And that new theory with this definition and this axiom of what it means uh, doesn't allow you to prove any new things in the old language, which is a little bit awkward way to say that it's safe.
Yep.
It's actually more than safe, right? Like, safe would just be mean if the old theory didn't prove false, then this new thing doesn't prove false. Um, what we're saying is a little bit more. If this old thing didn't prove, 4 equals 2 plus 2, then this new thing doesn't either, even though that thing might be perfectly okay to prove.
Yep. Yeah. So it's a, but I don't know. Yeah. So I don't know. Just definitions is like a super important thing that it doesn't really show up in like core calculi, really. But
Hmm.
of course, if you ever build a system, like you definitely have a mechanism for like making definitions somehow. And in Coq or Lean, there are keywords, def or definition, um, and those are doing something. And then they make that there's a special rule, delta unfolding, right? That
Hmm.
like lets you unfold definitions. And like, what even is delta unfolding? You never hear, well, we don't ever
Yeah.
hear about that in the context of lambda calculus. So I was talking about alpha equivalence and beta equivalence, beta reduction. But how often do they talk about delta reduction?
Yeah,
It's
yeah, yeah.
much less talked about. And
I yeah, I often say that unfolding definitions, right? This is the hardest problem in logic. If you know how to unfold definitions wisely, then you know how to prove anything. Um, because you only unfold the definitions you need to unfold, and then everything else is just pencil pushing, right?
yeah,
It is just, applying the rules of logic at saturation. And if that thing doesn't work, it means you either don't have the right definitions or you've unfolded too much and you've given yourself too much knowledge to be able to stay within your, within your bounds.
yeah, it's an attitude. I'm open to that being what it all is.
I feel pretty
I don't,
strongly
yeah,
about this. I do think that, coming up with definitions is hard in general. And
yeah.
I do think that knowing when to unfold definitions is, an art and a science. It's not something that's exclusively the purview of humans, uh, especially
I
now.
feel that maybe what you're saying is almost like related to the idea of like a foundation of mathematics being a valid endeavor. Like the point of having a foundation of mathematics is that you can build by encoding or something like that, everything else you want to talk about. And when you're actually talking about things in terms that a human being can understand, you better be using things that are you're probably using things that are pretty far from the foundations, a pile of encodings. And you're saying that, like, yeah, if you unfold everything, all the definitions, then the brute force rules of logic ought to be able to spray outward and prove they by definition prove everything that can be proven because they are the things
Mhm.
that define what
Yeah.
proven is. And but you can get lost. So if you just need to expose exactly the right thing, and then maybe there's only 100 moves you can make. You do them on a computer, and you're
Yes.
fine. So that
Yeah.
that is a perspective on why, like having automated theorem provers, generic technology could be useful for any field or something. Encoded in those terms, and then this generic reasoner over logical principles can just spray and solve any field if you have the right encodings or something, and the right ability to unfold definitions and not choke the solver.
Yes,
Um,
yes. I think people, already knew this in the days of ACL2. It's a hard problem.
yeah. I mean,
Uh,
I've been writing a simplifier and an enfolder, the thing that's picking when to like unfold stuff. And I'm sure there's papers out there. I need to go find them and read them. Like it's not obvious to me when I should be unfolding or not to like get what I actually wanted to
you
happen.
don't say.
And it's the same thing I've heard I have seen papers for computer algebra systems where they're like, the notion of simplification is highly ill-formed. And really, you want it to have done whatever you want it to have done in that particular situation. And if you ever don't do that, the user gets furious. Um, And so like, and they want totally different things given the same input, depending on what sort of they're feeling that day or what field they're in, or uh,
I would like to see that paper you read this
I
from.
think
Um,
it's yeah, just what is
no,
simplification
yeah,
is
I
not well
completely agree.
formed
And yeah, in paper
or unique.
proofs, a simplification is basically anything you expect the reader to do without too much trouble, right?
Exactly. And so
But man, your reader could be a completely different person from, one paper to the next.
yeah, or the same paper to two different readers. They could be just wildly different. Things they think is obvious for one isn't for the other.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. And so you just get more mad at a computer because you're like, you're supposed to be helping me, not hurting me. Well, I
I
should have
do
just
get,
talked to one of
yeah.
my friends if you're going to be a pain in the ass.
Well, there we are.
Yeah,
Um, I do get mad at papers that are like, by definition, and then something that is absolutely not by definition, but is, unfold the definition and then do a bunch of sort of straightforward reasoning steps. And that is absolutely what a mathematician means by definition. Um, they do not mean the definition says exactly this. They mean the definition implies this, which, that logically is a tautology, right? Of course it does. That's what a theorem means. But they mean you have to unfold the definition here. You don't need to use any lemmas about the object that I've defined. And now you need to do a little bit of logic reasoning step, but nothing that's going to, sprain your wrist.
yeah.
And sometimes that's true. And of course, sometimes that's just not true. Um, all right, we've been all over the place here.
We
I don't
sure
know that
have.
we've actually even really scratched what to say
Types.
about type theory.
Yeah,
I was saying this before we were on the air, so to speak, but I'm going to say it again. Um, Obviously, all these different foundations of mathematics, right? They're not necessarily being studied by the same people, but come on, they're being studied by the same group of like, 5,000 people. And so of course they want to know, okay, what is the relative consistency strength? In particular, how hard is it to prove, or can piano arithmetic prove that, if Zermelo set theory is consistent, then Martin-Luft type theory is consistent? Because hey, at the end of the day, we sure do care that these things are consistent. The incompleteness theorem tells us that all these things are like, um, you know, can't prove their own consistency, right? And a weaker system can't prove the consistency of a stronger system. But okay, what's the hierarchy? What systems can prove other systems are consistent? And we actually have this fascinating picture of like, Zermelo set theories up here and Marlow type theory is down here, and piano arithmetic is all the way down here, and second order arithmetic, third order arithmetic, stuff like that. And yeah, that picture is kind of fascinating. I hope I'll have time someday to really unpack it. The technical details are, you know, perhaps too arcane to really get into podcast format. But this is fun, right? I don't think this is like fundamentally useful to humankind, though it is kind of nice to have uh you know, consistency, relative consistency, right? Like ZFC has been around forever. We believe in it, or at least we believe that there's no easy contradiction. Um, Piano arithmetic, yeah, if there's a contradiction in piano arithmetic, then, whatever. We we take off all our clothes and like, just run into the streets. Um, so it's at least useful to know that your system is not more inconsistent than these things, because those things are pretty trustworthy. Uh, and um, I guess that's reassuring. It's also very fun to try and figure out how to, turn one thing into the other and code one thing into the other, and to see what happens when you add a little bit, sprinkle a little bit of like choice into your type theory, or sprinkle a little bit of I don't know, universes into your set theory.
I'm
So
very excited for next month when AGI comes and it proves that Peano arithmetic is inconsistent and
I
in a way we can understand and like that'll be very exciting. So I got
I
that on my iCalendar
First of
for
all,
March.
a Fields medalist once gave a talk about this scenario, which I thought was fun. He wasn't really a logician, so his talk, I'm not sure, is one for the ages. But there was a logician who was convinced that this was a possibility, Ed
Uh,
Nelson.
Ed Nelson, yeah.
And I should talk about this because I've thought about this scenario. I personally think if piano arithmetic is inconsistent, then it's over. Like I don't like I don't know how to cope with this fact. Um I just don't. I have no emotional like preparedness. It would I would be more prepared for aliens to land in a flying saucer than for this to occur.
It could happen.
I wonder if I feel like David Hampton's talked about this at some point. Anyway, however, ZFC can be inconsistent, no problem. Like that doesn't faze me even a little bit. Um, and ZFC plus, I don't know, Reinhardt Cardinals or something. Sorry, bad example. That is inconsistent. ZF plus Reinhardt Cardinals, sure. Like no one would care except that there is. Um, So, there's a scale to these things. And that scale, like I would go from absolutely devastated to my core and left devoid of meaning for piano arithmetic to excited but um relatively unfazed for ZFC, right? So there's a pretty big range there.
Yeah, I mean, I should read this lecture about like what would happen, but I don't know. Inconsistency isn't a problem in every field except mathematics. Well, maybe it is a problem, but like it doesn't worry people too much. Physics is inconsistent with itself, right? And we try and pump on that and hope we like learn something, trying to bring it closer to consistency. But
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
I don't know,
In
life goes
in
on.
math,
It still could be
yeah.
fun and
In math, life
intellectual.
does not go on though, right?
I mean, was math really about like being right or something? I don't know. Like piano arithmetic, is it even true in some I don't want to go here. This is too deep this is too philosophical in a way that
Yeah.
I'm
Or
not
or I could
intellectually
just
like
answer both of your questions with yes, absolutely. Um, I don't know. This is kind of the podcast for it, I'd say. Right? Like who else is
yeah.
talking about these important questions?
Yeah, they're just I don't know I could say anything too intelligent about it. I'm just not like a philosophical heavy hitter like that. I'm not sure or convinced anyone can say anything too intelligent about like what math being true should really mean.
That eh, that may
Uh
be true, but I think you'll find that quite a bit of ink has been spilled by some very
yes.
notorious people on this very
Yeah.
subject, right? Like Frege, right? Frege wrote a few equations and then, hundreds of thousands of words. And Piano from Piano Arithmetic, right? Wrote a lot about this. Gödel was actually like somehow not a hugely prolific writer of philosophy, even though, that was where his interest lied. But, Hilbert wrote quite a bit of this, on this. Yeah. Poincaré wrote quite a bit on this. Like people really thought about this exact question you're talking about quite hard.
Yeah.
And so I don't think, I'm not David Hilbert, in many ways, but I don't think it's absurd for us to like
You're
get
taller.
into this. Like it's not a
Is that true?
shameful taboo to talk about, hey, what the hell? Like, do we really believe in pan-arithmetic? And
Well,
Ed, I want to talk about at some point Ed Nelson and like why he didn't, you know, sit well with PA.
yeah, it's just that I know that, some of the greatest mathematical geniuses ever have thought a lot about this because it's like the subject most dearest to their heart, kind of, and spilled all this ink and all that. And I just don't. I haven't read what they've said, and all I can do is like what I've off the cuff sort of felt after thinking about it for,
Okay.
you
In
know.
fairness, this is philosophy, right? So in math, like, yeah, in math, you can try and think about things, off the top of the cuff and get it all wrong, and then people can make fun of you. But in philosophy, who cares, right? It's philosophy. I can hear all the philosophers I know like get put on their cleats to come and stomp on me.
Well, come on the podcast. We're glad to have you and go rip into Cody. It's my favorite thing to do.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, no. I think these questions are interesting. And of course, Martin Luff, this occurred to him as well when he created Martin Luff type theory. He was like trying to build a logic of, reasoning, and so when you do that, you kind of want it to be consistent. Amusingly, he got it wrong the first time. Like his first logic was inconsistent, um, which I guess is a strong tradition. Every great logician starts by, building a logic and then accidentally getting it inconsistent. Um, but but yeah, I mean, yeah, these questions are really, really core to the field. And we have answers to these questions. One of the answers is just, it's been around for a while and people have tried pretty hard to build paradoxes and haven't managed. It's a boring answer, but it is an answer. We are a little bit adrift, though
We are.
I'm having a great deal of fun. However, if I time this, I suspect that we are quite a bit over the hour, which, I guess people can decide to stop listening whenever they want to. But we might be wise to wrap up here.
Yeah,
Um,
what are the big lessons? Types are a
yeah.
thing. Uh, I don't know if what Russell did has that much to do with ints and Fortran or not. Um,
No, I think one useful lesson is it is a worthwhile endeavor to try and come at this with very deep, like very naive philosophy and try to understand what do we want to do in math? What do we want to do in logic? What do we want to do, programmatically? And then you come up with these very, very generic, strange, abstract principles. And I think that's kind of where the exciting stuff is, like small talk, everything's an
mm,
object and all you can do is pass messages, all right, go, it's like those homework questions that are one-liners and you have 4 hours to answer.
yeah,
What does
small
this
talk.
mean? What does it mean to push this as far as you can go and make this precise mathematically? And I think type theory is born out of one of these endeavors, and I don't know. That leads to some fun conversations at least.
Yeah,
All right,
I
the
would.
knuckle jaggler. It's cool. You should all use it and please send comments to Phil. Tell him how he got it wrong. Tell
Yeah,
him what he needs to be
I
doing
mean,
differently.
kind of the only thing worse than being ripped into is being ignored, right?
I don't know. I think I
I
might
don't know
prefer being
either.
ignored. I don't enjoy either, but I guess it depends, Having a fun debate is great. Having a fun debate that turns into people just piling onto you is not great. And then having people just absolutely rip into you is horrible. And in
Yeah,
the age of the internet, right, where, every day, like if I get insulted by 10 people, I am just crushed, right? That's the end of me. But in the age of the internet, you can get, absolutely insulted by, 1,000 people, and, none of them will think any more of it,
yeah.
an hour later.
A million people. Incredible what technology has achieved.
I think the day I get insulted by 1 million people is a day I really need to like look closely at my life.
I feel like that
Um,
might be some way to like unlock cosmic superpowers or something, or like make a
I
deal
can
with
tell you by
hell or
observation that
something.
it's probably not the case. But yeah, hopefully we can find a happy medium and be perhaps congratulated by a few and insulted by a few.
Mhm.
All right, I'm gonna call this one. Let's
Yep.
do this again. This is very fun, and I don't know, what do the people want? I I
I don't know.
I need to check my feedback box. Maybe that's
Does
why
it
I'm
matter
not
what they
getting
want?
insulted. I
I
mean,
think it
it's
would be
certainly,
fun to like get experts on here on their topics and grill them a little bit. That seems fun. Fun? I don't know.
I agree. Um, I do want to do that. We'll see. We'll see. I'll send out some emails. Maybe people like, no, dear listeners, you're part of a select few of people that listen to this podcast. If I were more famous, I would get all these mathematical celebrities to come and talk about logic. Maybe I should try a little bit harder. Um, you
I
know,
mean, I think people are.
the polish is low, so I don't know if I feel very comfortable, pretending that I have a real thing going, but I might be worth a try.
It's like kind of nice to just you give this hour or 2 hour Zoom call or something, and you get like a little free publicity. Kind of everybody can use publicity. It's useful. Well, maybe not everybody, but like people who are
I agree.
academics who
It
are
doesn't,
like trying
it
to
really
reach
hurts.
people, they kind of tend to be into it. You don't get to be a known person by like talking into a knothole in a tree. You're someone who like wants to be heard a little bit, I think.
Yeah, I think it's worth a try. I'll try to come up with people who I think would be fun to have and that I want to have, and we'll see. All right, Coolio. I'm going to end this now, and yeah, to everybody out there, take care, and I'm sure at least we'll have Phil on soon enough.
Yeah,
He
that's
is
true.
our local celebrity.
Give us requests of what you want us to jabber about, or you want me to poke Cody to jabber
Yeah.
about.
Yeah. If you want Phil to poke me, please give us a like. All right.